In the quiet farmlands of rural Missouri, 1997, a single mother's desperate attempt to save her family's crumbling homestead takes an extraordinary turn when she discovers not cracked foundation beneath her barn, but a forgotten bank vault filled with century-old currency and artifacts from America's most notorious train heist. With nothing but mounting debts, 2 young children to feed, and the suspicious attention of powerful local interests, Sarah Keller must decide whether to surrender this historical treasure or risk everything to uncover the dangerous truth of her property's hidden past. This is the story of a woman who merely wanted to repair a leaking roof, only to find herself unraveling secrets that powerful people have kept buried for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ancient tractor sputtered and died for the 3rd time that morning. Sarah Keller slammed her palm against the steering wheel, a string of curses escaping her lips before she remembered her daughter watching from the farmhouse porch. She forced a smile and waved, then turned back to the stubborn machine that had belonged to her ex-husband's family for generations. Just like the failing farm, she was now somehow expected to maintain alone. The summer heat was oppressive, making the air shimmer above the struggling cornfields that stretched behind the weathered red barn. Fields that should have been vibrant green were instead patchy and yellowing, despite Sarah's best efforts. The drought had hit Madison County hard this year, and as a novice farmer with limited resources, she was fighting a losing battle. "Need some help with that, Miss Keller?" called a voice from the gravel driveway. Sarah shaded her eyes against the sun to see Vernon Hughes, her elderly neighbor, ambling toward her with the unhurried gait of someone who had spent a lifetime pacing himself against the demands of farm work. Just her luck. Vernon meant well, but his help always came with a side of unsolicited advice about how her ex-husband would have done things differently, as if she needed the reminder. "Good morning, Vernon," Sarah replied, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "Just the usual temperamental behavior from old Bessie here." Vernon reached the tractor and peered knowingly at the engine. Fuel filters probably clogged again. Tom always kept a spare in the workshop. Sarah bit her lip. Tom hadn't kept spare anything in the workshop for the 3 years before he'd walked out on her and the kids, declaring farm life too restrictive for a man with his ambitions. Those ambitions apparently included a cocktail waitress in Kansas City, and none of the responsibilities of his failing family farm or his 2 young children. "I ordered parts last week," she said. "They should be here Monday." Vernon made a non-committal sound, the kind that suggested she was already too late in addressing the problem. "Well, what were you aiming to do today anyway? Maybe there's a workaround." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "The barn roof is leaking again. I need to get some plywood up there before the next storm ruins what little we've managed to put up." "Barn's been trouble since the flood of '83, Vernon commented. "Foundation's never been right since. Tom's daddy meant to rebuild it proper, but never got around to it." Like father, like son, Sarah thought bitterly. The Keller men were full of intentions that somehow never materialized into actions. "Emma," she called to her 8-year-old daughter, who was still watching from the porch, "can you bring Mom some water, please?" As Emma disappeared inside, Vernon shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Sarah, I don't mean to pry, but word around town is the bank's been sending you letters." Sarah stiffened. Madison County's gossip network was alarmingly efficient. "It's nothing I can't handle." "Mullins at the bank. He's not known for patience when it comes to late payments," Vernon pressed. "If you need help—" "We're fine," Sarah interrupted more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone. "But thank you for your concern." Emma arrived with a mason jar of water, saving Sarah from further conversation. Vernon tipped his hat to them both and retreated, but not before adding, "Well, my offer stands." And Douglas Prescott Was asking about your property again at the Grange meeting. Says he'd give you a fair price, all things considered. Sarah's jaw tightened. Douglas Prescott, with his fancy suits and city manners, had been trying to buy up struggling farms throughout Madison County for the past 2 years. His fair prices were notorious for being anything but, yet desperate farmers had been selling anyway, unable to keep up with mounting debts and changing markets. "Not interested," she called after Vernon's retreating form. "Not now, not ever." Emma looked up at her mother with wise eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "Are we going to have to sell the farm, Mommy?" Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "No, sweetheart, this is our home. We're Kellers, and Kellers don't give up." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears, but she needed Emma to believe them. With the tractor out of commission, Sarah spent the morning gathering tools from the workshop, determined to at least make a start on the barn roof. Her 12-year-old son, Jack, was at summer baseball practice in town, which meant she had a few hours of relative peace to figure out her next move. The barn had been built sometime in the 1890s, according to family law, and had weathered more than a century of Missouri seasons with varying degrees of success. The massive oak beams were still solid, but decades of patchwork repairs had left the roof vulnerable. As Sarah pushed open the heavy doors, the familiar smell of hay, dust, and aged wood enveloped her. The interior was cool and dim after the bright summer day outside. Shafts of sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. Sarah placed her toolbox on a workbench and surveyed the damage. Water stains marked the hay bales stored in the loft, and a steady drip from above had created a small puddle on the packed earth floor. Sarah climbed the ladder to the loft, testing each rung carefully. Most of the roof could be patched from the inside, sparing her the danger of working on the steep pitch of the external roof. As she reached the top and pulled herself into the loft, her foot dislodged a bale of hay, sending it tumbling to the floor below with a heavy thud. "Emma?" she called, suddenly concerned her daughter might have followed her into the barn. "Are you in here?" No answer came, but the fallen hay bale had revealed something unusual, a section of the floor that didn't match the rest. While most of the loft was covered with rough-hewn planks laying across the support beams, this section appeared to be a large square of concrete, incongruous with the wooden structure surrounding it. Curious, Sarah moved more hay bales aside, exposing more of the strange feature. It was definitely concrete, about 8 feet square, with what appeared to be a seam around the perimeter. In the center was a metal ring, heavily rusted but still intact, lying flat against the surface. "What on earth?" Sarah murmured, kneeling to examine the ring. She gave it an experimental tug, but it didn't budge. Years of grime and rust had sealed it in place. She retrieved a crowbar from her toolbox and worked it under the edge of the ring, applying steady pressure until something shifted with a grating sound. Encouraged, she worked the crowbar around the circumference until the ring lifted enough for her to grasp it with both hands. With a deep breath, Sarah pulled. The metal ring rose reluctantly, bringing with it a circular concrete plug about 2 feet in diameter. The effort made her muscles burn, but as the plug lifted, a rush of stale air escaped from the opening, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of old paper and metal. Sarah set the heavy plug aside and peered into the darkness below. The opening revealed a metal ladder descending into what appeared to be a small chamber beneath the barn floor. She reached for her flashlight, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a sight that made Sarah gasp. Below was a small room, perhaps 10 feet square, with walls of reinforced concrete. But it was what filled the room that stole her breath. A large metal safe with an antique dial lock surrounded by stacks of wooden crates and what appeared To be leather satchels. No way, Sarah whispered in disbelief. She played the flashlight beam around the chamber again, confirming what she was seeing. A hidden vault, untouched for what looked like decades, concealed beneath her barn. For a moment, she considered calling Vernon or the sheriff, but something held her back. The farm was drowning in debt, the bank was sending increasingly threatening letters, and her children's future hung in the balance. Whatever was in that vault might change everything. Decision made, Sarah positioned the flashlight to illuminate the ladder and carefully began her descent into the chamber. The metal rungs were cold under her hands, but sturdy despite their age. As she reached the bottom, the full scope of her discovery became clear. The safe dominated the small space, an imposing black metal box with elaborate gold pinstriping around the dial, the kind seen in old Western films behind bank tellers. The name Diebold was emblazoned across the top in faded gold lettering. The wooden crates were stacked neatly against one wall, their lids secured with rusted metal clasps. One had partially collapsed with age, revealing yellowed papers inside. The leather satchels were cracked and brittle, but still closed with tarnished brass buckles. Sarah approached the safe first, running her fingers over the cold metal surface. The combination dial moved stiffly when she tried to turn it, but without the combination it was useless. She turned her attention to the crates instead, carefully prying open the lid of the one that had already begun to deteriorate. Inside were bundles of papers tied with faded ribbon. Sarah lifted out the top bundle and gently untied it. The documents were newspaper clippings, browning with age, but still legible. The headline of the topmost clipping made her heart skip a beat. Daring. Daylight robbery. Prairie Express heist nets thieves $50,000 in gold and currency. The date on the newspaper was October 12th, 1892. Sarah rifled through more clippings, all reporting on the same event, a spectacular train robbery that had occurred near Jefferson City. According to the articles, 3 masked men had stopped the Prairie Express by placing obstacles on the tracks, then dynamited the mail car containing a Federal Reserve shipment. They had escaped with over $50,000 in gold coins and newly printed currency, an enormous sum for the time. The articles mentioned that the robbers had vanished without a trace, and the money was never recovered. One of the later clippings speculated that the mastermind behind the heist was a man named Nathaniel Blackwood, a former railroad employee with a grudge against the company, but there was never enough evidence to make an arrest. With trembling hands, Sarah set the newspapers aside and reached for one of the leather satchels. The buckle resisted at first, then gave way with a soft snap. Inside, wrapped in deteriorating cloth, were stacks of currency, not modern bills, but old, oversized notes with elaborate engravings and faded green ink. Sarah carefully lifted one out, marveling at the crisp $20 gold certificate from 1890, bearing the portrait of Alexander Hamilton. "Oh my God," she whispered, mentally calculating how many similar bills might be in this satchel alone. Even if they were only worth their face value, which she doubted, given their age and likely rarity, there was a small fortune here, and there were 5 more satchels, plus whatever might be in the safe. A sudden noise from above made Sarah nearly drop the bill. She looked up to see Emma's curious face peering down through the opening. "Mommy! What are you doing in a hole?" "Emma! Stay back from the edge, honey," Sarah called, hastily returning the bill to the satchel and buckling it closed. "I'm just checking something in the barn. Go back to the house and wait for me, okay?" Emma's face disappeared, but Sarah could tell by the lack of retreating footsteps that her daughter hadn't obeyed. Sarah quickly made her way back up the ladder, emerging from the hidden chamber to find Emma standing nearby, eyes wide with curiosity. "Is that a secret hideout, like in my books?" Emma asked excitedly. Sarah brushed dust from her jeans, mind racing to decide how much to share with her daughter. "Something like that. But it's our secret for now, okay? You can't tell anyone about it, not even Jack or your friends at school." Emma nodded solemnly, clearly thrilled to be entrusted with an adult secret. "Is there treasure down there? Like pirates?" Sarah managed a smile, though her thoughts were spinning with implications. "Not pirates, but yes, there might be something valuable. But we need to be very careful about it. Promise me you won't go near that opening when I'm not here." "I promise," Emma said, then added with the practicality of childhood, "Can we have lunch now?" "I'm hungry." "Of course," Sarah replied, relieved by the change of subject. "Let's go back to the house." Before leaving the barn, Sarah carefully replaced the concrete plug, concealing the entrance to the vault, then covered it again with hay bales. As she secured the barn doors behind them, Sarah's mind was already churning with questions. How had a vault connected to a notorious train robbery ended up beneath her barn? Who had built it? And why had it remained undiscovered for so long? And most importantly, what did this mean for her and her children? Back at the farmhouse, Sarah moved mechanically through the routine of making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for Emma, her thoughts still in that hidden vault beneath the barn floor. The implications were staggering. If those bills were authentic, and she had no reason to doubt they were, she could be looking at a solution to all her financial problems, but there was a nagging voice of caution. Money from a train robbery over 100 years ago had to have complications. Legal ones, certainly. Ethical ones, possibly. And if local gossip was anything to go by, discoveries of this magnitude never stayed secret for long in small communities like Madison County. "Mum, you're putting jelly on the counter," Emma observed, pulling Sarah back to reality. "Oh!" Sarah quickly wiped up the sticky mess, forcing herself to focus. "Sorry, honey. Just a little distracted." Emma took a big bite of her sandwich, jelly squishing out the sides. "Is it because of the treasure room?" "Partly," Sarah admitted. She took a seat across from her daughter, deciding on a version of the truth. "I found some very old things in that room that might be valuable, but I need to figure out who they belong to and what to do with them." "They belong to us," Emma said matter-of-factly. "It's our barn." The simplicity of a child's logic brought a smile to Sarah's face. "It's a bit more complicated than that, sweetie, but you're right that we found them on our property." The rumble of tires on gravel announced Jack's return from baseball practice. Moments later, her son burst through the screen door, his face flushed from the summer heat and physical exertion. "Coach says I've got the best pitching arm he's seen in years," Jack announced, dropping his gear bag by the door despite Sarah's frequent reminders to keep it on the porch. At 12, Jack was all gangly limbs and boundless energy, with his father's dark hair and stubborn chin, but Sarah's thoughtful eyes. "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "There's sandwich fixings on the counter." "Did you fix the tractor?" Jack asked, already assembling a sandwich twice the size of what Emma was eating. "Not yet. Parts won't be in until Monday." Jack took a massive bite and spoke through it. "Mr. Prescott was at practice today, talking to Coach Wilson." Sarah tensed. "Douglas Prescott? What was he doing there?" Jack shrugged. "Dunno, but he asked me how things were going at our farm. Said he might stop by to talk to you." The idea of Douglas Prescott making a personal visit sent a wave of anxiety through Sarah. The man had been systematically buying up struggling farms throughout the county, only to flip them to corporate agricultural interests for substantial profit. He'd made 3 offers on the Keller farm already, each one presented as a final courtesy before foreclosure inevitably forced her hand. "If he shows up, I'm not here," Sarah said firmly. "Mom found a secret room under the barn," Emma announced suddenly, then immediately clapped her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with the realization she'd broken her promise. Jack paused mid-bite. "What secret room?" "Emma," Sarah sighed. "You promised." "Sorry." Emma mumbled behind her hand, looking genuinely contrite. "What secret room?" Jack repeated, his interest thoroughly piqued. Sarah weighed her options. Jack was old enough to keep a secret if he understood the importance, and frankly, she could use an extra set of hands and eyes if she was going to explore the vault further. "Finish your lunch," she said, "then I'll show you both." 30 minutes later, the three Kellers stood in the dim light of the barn as Sarah moved the hay bales aside once more. Jack helped her lift the concrete plug, his eyes widening as the hidden chamber was revealed. "Whoa," he breathed. "How long has this been here?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I only found it this morning." With both children watching in fascination, Sarah descended the ladder again, flashlight in hand. "Stay up there until I tell you it's safe," she instructed. The vault looked exactly as she'd left it. The imposing safe, the wooden crates, the leather satchels. This time, Sarah opened a different crate, finding more newspaper clippings, but also handwritten letters, and what appeared to be a journal bound in cracked leather. She picked up the journal and carefully opened it to the first page. The handwriting was elaborate but legible, in the flowing penmanship of a bygone era. At the top of the page was inscribed, "Property of Carter Blackwood, 1893. "Blackwood," Sarah murmured. The name from the newspaper articles about the train robbery, Nathaniel Blackwood, had been the suspected mastermind. Was Carter a relative? Perhaps his brother or son? "Mum, can we come down now?" Jack called impatiently from above. "Just a minute," Sarah replied, quickly flipping through the journal. Most entries seemed to be mundane accounts of farm life, but she caught glimpses of more intriguing content, references to N's plan and securing our future. She tucked the journal into her back pocket for later reading. "Okay, come on down. Carefully, Emma, hold the ladder." Both children descended into the vault, their expressions a mixture of wonder and disbelief, as Sarah showed them the satchels of currency and the old newspapers. "Are we rich now?" Jack asked, holding one of the old bills with careful fingers. "It's complicated," Sarah replied. "This money, I think it might be from a train robbery that happened over 100 years ago." "Cool," Jack exclaimed. "Like Jesse James?" "Not exactly, but the point is, we can't just start spending it. We need to figure out what to do, legally and ethically. But if it's been here all this time, doesn't that make it ours?" Jack asked, echoing Emma's earlier sentiment. "Possession isn't the same as ownership," Sarah explained, though she was wrestling with the same question herself. "But right now, our priority is keeping this discovery quiet while I do some research." She turned to her children with a serious expression. "This has to be a complete secret. No telling friends, teachers, or anyone. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. Understand?" Both children nodded solemnly, impressed by their mother's gravity. "Good. Now, let's close this. Up and head back to the house. I want to read this journal." That evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with Carter Blackwood's journal open before her, a cup of coffee cooling at her elbow. The old kerosene lamp cast a warm glow over the pages, lending an appropriately historical atmosphere to her reading. The journal began in January 1893, 3 months after the Prairie Express robbery. The early entries were indeed mundane, weather reports, crop planning, church socials, but gradually, as Sarah read on, more revealing passages emerged. February 18th, 1893. N visited today. He's still nervous about the authorities, though the case has gone cold. Says we should wait another year before making any significant changes to our circumstances. I'm inclined to agree. Patience has gotten us this far. March 4th, 1893. Purchased the additional 40 acres from Wilkins. He seemed surprised I could produce cash, but asked no questions. The farm now extends to the creek, as I've always wanted. N was displeased about the purchase, says it's too soon to be spending. We argued. Sarah flipped ahead, scanning entries until one caught her eye. July 12, 1893. Work on the vault is complete. N has gone to Canada, says he'll return in spring. The safe is installed and the entrance concealed. I sleep better knowing it's secure. Margaret knows nothing of it, which is for the best. What she doesn't know, she can't reveal, even accidentally. Sarah's pulse quickened. Here was confirmation that the vault had been constructed specifically to hide something, almost certainly the robbery proceeds. She read on, finding scattered references to the investment and our security over the following months. Then, a disturbing entry. November 30th, 1893. 2 Pinkerton men in town, asking questions at the general store. They didn't approach me directly, but Simmons says they were showing photographs around. I fear N may have been recognized during the incident. I've moved everything to the vault as a precaution. The next entry made Sarah's blood run cold. December 1893, terrible news. N was apprehended in Montreal. The newspaper says he revealed nothing about accomplices or the money, but who knows what methods they might use to extract information. I've written to our mutual friend in St. Louis for legal assistance, though I fear it may be too late. If the authorities come, I will claim ignorance. The farm and the vault are in my name alone. Sarah turned the page anxiously, but found it torn out. In fact, several pages appeared to have been removed. The journal resumed in April 1894. April 18th, 1894. N was sentenced to 20 years. He maintained his innocence and, true to his word, implicated no one. I owe him a debt I can never repay. For now, everything remains secure. I've told Margaret we must economize due to poor crop yields. She doesn't question why we suddenly have less, though we've actually lost nothing but the ability to spend without raising suspicions. The entries continued for several more years, growing increasingly mundane. Carter Blackwood seemed to have settled into the role of a simple farmer, though occasional cryptic references to our investment suggested he remained guardian of the robbery proceeds. The final entry was dated September 3rd, 1899. Farm is prospering, though I take no pleasure in it with N still imprisoned. Margaret expects our 3rd child this winter. I've decided this journal has served its purpose and poses unnecessary risk. Future record-keeping will be confined to farm accounts only. This volume goes into the vault with the rest. Sarah closed the journal, her mind racing. Carter Blackwood had clearly been an accomplice to Nathaniel Blackwood, likely his brother, in the Prairie Express robbery. He had used the farm to hide both himself and the stolen money, building a secret vault beneath the barn and living a double life as a respectable farmer. But how did the Keller farm connect to the Blackwood farm? Sarah tried to recall the property. History Tom had once recited proudly. The farm had been in his family since the 1920s, purchased by his great-grandfather. Before that, it had belonged to... She couldn't remember the name. Sarah rose from the table and went to the old roll-top desk in the corner of the living room. Tom's grandfather had been meticulously organized, keeping all important documents in labeled folders. If she was lucky, the property deed and history would still be there. After 20 minutes of searching, she found what she was looking for, a thick envelope labeled Property Deed and Survey, 1923. Inside was the original deed transferring ownership from the estate of Margaret Blackwood, widow, to Joseph Keller, Tom's great-grandfather. Margaret Blackwood, Sarah whispered, the wife mentioned in the journal. The Keller farm had once been the Blackwood farm, which meant that the vault and its contents had been hidden there for over 100 years, unknown to generations of Keller's. A sudden knock at the front door made Sarah jump, the papers scattering to the floor. Who would be visiting at, she glanced at the clock, nearly 11 at night. Heart pounding, she gathered the documents and shoved them back into the desk drawer. Perhaps it was Vernon, checking on her after their conversation earlier. Or maybe Jack's baseball coach dropping off equipment. The knock came again, more insistent. Sarah approached cautiously, wishing for a peephole or window that would allow her to see who stood on her porch. "Who is it?" she called, one hand on the doorknob, the other reaching for the baseball bat they kept by the door for security in the isolated farmhouse. "Ms. Keller." "It's Douglas Prescott. I apologize for the late hour, but I was passing by and saw your lights, and I wanted to discuss a business proposition that might interest you." Sarah froze. Douglas Prescott at her door at 11 p.m. was no coincidence, not on the same day she discovered the vault. But how could he possibly know? Vernon might have mentioned her working in the barn, but he couldn't have known what she'd found. "It's very late, Mr. Prescott," she called through the door. "Whatever business you have can wait until business hours." "I'm afraid it can't," Prescott replied, his usually smooth voice hardening slightly. "I've received some information about your property that changes the equation considerably. I think you'll want to hear my new offer." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. What information? And from whom? "Good night, Mr. Prescott," she said firmly. "Please call my home during normal hours if you wish to speak with me." There was a pause. Then Prescott's voice came again, lower and more menacing than she'd ever heard it. "I know about the vault, Ms. Keller, and I know what's in it. This isn't a conversation you want to postpone." Sarah's blood ran cold. It was impossible. She had only discovered the vault hours ago, and only her children knew about it. Unless... "Mom!" Jack's voice came from the stairwell. "Who's at the door?" "Go back to bed, Jack," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything's fine." "Your son should hear this too," Prescott called. "After all, his future is at stake, as is yours, Miss Keller. The contents of that vault aren't as straightforward as you might think." Sarah's mind raced. How did Prescott know? And more importantly, what did he know that she didn't? The journal had suggested the money was from the train robbery, but Prescott's tone implied something more, something specific to her situation. "Last chance, Ms. Keller," Prescott said. "Open the door, or I make a call that ensures you never see the inside of that vault again." Sarah's fingers tightened around the baseball bat as she weighed her options. Douglas Prescott knowing about the vault changed everything. She glanced at Jack, standing wide-eyed on the stairs, then back at the door. "Go upstairs and stay with Emma," she told Jack in a whisper. "Lock the bedroom door and don't come out until I call you." "But, Mom..." "Now, Jack." Something in her tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because Jack retreated up the stairs without further argument. Sarah waited until she heard the bedroom door close, then turned back to the front door, took a deep breath, and opened it just enough to see Douglas Prescott standing on her porch. In his mid-50s, Prescott had the polished appearance of a man who considered himself above rural concerns, despite making his fortune from them. His silver hair was immaculately styled, and even at this late hour he wore a pressed button-down shirt and tailored slacks. The only concession to the setting was his footwear, expensive leather boots instead of his usual loafers, already showing dust from the farmyard. "Ms. Keller," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for seeing reason." "You have 5 minutes," Sarah replied, keeping the door mostly closed and the bat visible. "Explain how you know about something I only discovered today." Prescott's smile faltered slightly. "May I come in? This conversation would be better conducted sitting down. 5 minutes from right where you're standing." His expression hardened. "Very well. The vault beneath your barn has been the subject of local legend for generations, Ms. Keller. Most dismissed it as folklore, but my family has maintained an interest in it since the 1920s. Your family?" Sarah's grip on the bat loosened slightly in surprise. "My grandfather was William Prescott, chief investigator for the Missouri Pacific Railroad at the time of the Prairie Express robbery. He dedicated his career to recovering the stolen money and bringing all parties to justice." Sarah's mind flashed to the journal entries about Pinkerton detectives asking questions in town. That still doesn't explain how you knew I'd found it today. Prescott glanced pointedly at the bat. I've had this property under periodic surveillance since I returned to Madison County 5 years ago. Old family business, you understand. When unusual activity was noticed at your barn today, I was informed. You've been spying on me. Sarah's voice rose with indignation. Monitoring points of interest, Prescott corrected smoothly. The truth is, Ms. Keller, that vault and its contents legally belong to the Missouri Pacific Railroad, now part of Union Pacific. The statute of limitations on the theft may have expired, but property rights to stolen goods never do. Sarah's thoughts raced. If what Prescott said was true, the money wasn't legally hers, regardless of it being found on her property, but something didn't add up. If your family has known about this for so long, why hasn't anyone recovered it before now? Because no one could find it, Prescott admitted. My grandfather tracked Nathaniel Blackwood's accomplice, his brother Carter, to this farm. He was certain the money was here, but could never prove it or locate it. The case consumed him until his death, and now it consumes you, Sarah observed. Prescott's smile returned, colder than before. Let's say I have a professional and personal interest in resolving my grandfather's unfinished business, which brings me to my proposition. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. This contains a new offer for your farm. 3 times my previous one. You sign over the property, take the money, and walk away. I handle the legal complications of the vault and its contents. Everyone wins. Except I lose my home, and you get both the farm and whatever's in that vault, Sarah pointed out. How exactly is that a win for me? Because the alternative is significantly worse, Prescott replied, all pretense of congeniality falling away. I make one call to Union Pacific's legal department, and by morning this farm will be swarming with corporate lawyers, security personnel, and possibly federal agents. The vault will be sealed, its contents confiscated, and you'll be facing potential charges for concealing evidence in a historical theft, not to mention suspicious timing with your mortgage foreclosure proceedings. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. That's ridiculous. I just found it today. And who would believe that convenient timing? A struggling single mother, about to lose her farm, suddenly discovers a century-old vault filled with stolen money. The optics aren't in your favor, Ms. Keller. He was right, and they both knew it. Even if she could eventually prove her innocence, the legal battle would destroy what little remained of her finances and potentially separate her from her children during the investigation. Your 5 minutes are up, Sarah said, her mind working furiously for a solution. Sleep on it, Prescott suggested, extending the envelope which Sarah didn't take. I'll place this in your mailbox. Call me before noon tomorrow with your answer, or I'll be forced to involve the proper authorities. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Ms. Keller, don't get any ideas about removing items from the vault. That would constitute a federal crime. With that, he walked back to his luxury SUV parked beside the farmhouse. Sarah closed and locked the door, then sank to the floor, still clutching the baseball bat. The exhilaration of her discovery had transformed into a nightmare in the space of a few hours. She was trapped. Accept Prescott's offer and lose the farm, but protect her children from legal entanglements, or refuse and potentially lose everything. Mom, Jack called from upstairs. Is he gone? He's gone, Sarah confirmed, pulling herself to her feet. You can come down. Jack appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression a mixture of fear and determination that reminded Sarah painfully of herself. I heard some of it. He wants to take our farm because of what's in the vault. Sarah nodded, not seeing any point in hiding the truth from him. He says the money was stolen from the railroad company his grandfather worked for. Legally, he might be right about who it belongs to, but it's been under our barn for 100 years, Jack protested. Doesn't that make it ours now? Possession of stolen property doesn't make it yours, no matter how much time has passed, Sarah explained, repeating what she'd told the children earlier with a newly bitter understanding of the principle. They moved to the kitchen where Sarah put on the kettle, desperately needing something warm and normal in the midst of the chaos. As she prepared tea, she tried to think logically about her options. "What are we going to do?" Jack asked, sitting at the table where Carter Blackwood's journal still lay open. "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted. "But we're not giving up." She glanced at the journal, a thought taking shape. "Actually, I need to read more of this. There might be something that helps us understand exactly what's in that vault and who has claim to it." Jack picked up the journal, flipping carefully through its brittle pages. "What are you looking for? Anything about the legal status of the money or about Prescott's grandfather investigating the family?" They spent the next hour combing through the journal, focusing on the entries after Nathaniel Blackwood's arrest. Most were mundane farm records, but occasionally Carter mentioned his brother's legal situation or his own precautions against discovery. "Here," Jack said suddenly, pointing to an entry from 1895. "This mentions a Prescott." Sarah read where he indicated July 18th, 1895. "That railroad man Prescott came sniffing around again. Asked pointed questions about N and my sudden acquisition of the Morrison acreage 2 years ago. I maintain my story of an inheritance from our mother's side. He clearly doesn't believe me, but without evidence he can do nothing. The vault remains secure." "So Prescott was right about his grandfather investigating the Blackwoods," Sarah murmured. "There's more," Jack said, turning several pages forward. "Look at this one from 1897. March 3rd, 1897, N. died in prison last week. Pneumonia, they say, though I suspect years of hard labor weakened him beyond recovery. With him dies any direct knowledge of my involvement or the location of the funds. I alone know the truth now. Prescott still watches me, convinced I'm guilty but unable to prove it. Let him watch. The money is safe and legally mine now anyway, after Judge Wilson's ruling in the civil case. Even the railroad's lawyers conceded defeat." Sarah's heart raced as she reread the passage. "Legally mine now anyway, after Judge Wilson's ruling in the civil case," she repeated. "Jack, this suggests there was a court case about the money, and Carter Blackwood won. So the railroad can't claim it anymore?" Jack asked, eyes widening. "If there was a legal ruling, then no, they couldn't. At least not on the grounds Prescott is claiming." Sarah stood up, energized by this potential lifeline. "We need to find records of that court case. If Carter Blackwood legally established ownership of the money, then it became part of his estate, which eventually passed to us when your great-grandfather bought this property. Can we look up old court cases like that?" Sarah glanced at the clock, nearly 1 a.m. "Not tonight, but first thing tomorrow we're going to the county courthouse and the Historical Society. There has to be a record of this case somewhere." Jack yawned, the late hour finally catching up with him. "What about Prescott? He wants an answer by noon." "He'll get one," Sarah said grimly, "just not the one he's expecting." Morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it a determination that overshadowed Sarah's exhaustion. After getting the children ready and extracting solemn promises from both that they would tell no one about the vault, she drove them into town. The Madison County Historical Society operated out of a small building adjacent to the library, open only 3 days a week and run entirely by volunteers. Sarah's hopes plummeted when she found the door locked and a sign indicating the next open day would be Thursday, 2 days away. Prescott's deadline gave her less than 3 hours. "Now what?" Emma asked, kicking at pebbles on the sidewalk. "The courthouse," Sarah decided. "They'll have records going back that far." The Madison County Courthouse was an imposing limestone structure at the center of town, its architecture a testament to the prosperity of the region in the 1880s when it was built. Sarah ushered the children inside and navigated to the records department in the basement. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked up from her computer as they approached. Her nameplate read, Gloria Simmons. "Good morning," Sarah greeted her. "I need to access court records from 1897, specifically a civil case involving Carter Blackwood and the Missouri Pacific Railroad." Gloria's eyebrows rose. "That's quite specific for such an old case. May I ask why you need these records?" Sarah had prepared for this question. Family history research. The Blackwood farm eventually became the Keller farm, my farm. I'm trying to piece together its full history. It wasn't entirely untrue, which made it easier to deliver convincingly. "I see," Gloria said, not entirely convinced. "Well, records. That old would be in the archives. Not digitized, I'm afraid. You'd need to submit a formal request, and then it could take up to 2 weeks to retrieve them." 2 weeks? Sarah felt desperation rising. "Isn't there any way to access them sooner? It's really important." Gloria hesitated, studying Sarah's face. "You Keller's girl, aren't you? Married Tom?" "Yes. Well, divorced now, but yes." Gloria's expression softened slightly. "My husband played softball with Tom's father for 20 years. Good man, unlike his son." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Official procedure says 2 weeks, but I might be able to help you. The archives are just down that hallway, and I happen to have the key." Relief flooded through Sarah. "That would be incredibly helpful." "Wait here," Gloria instructed, retrieving a ring of keys from her desk drawer. "I'll see what I can find." 1897, you said? And the parties were Blackwood and Missouri Pacific Railroad? Sarah nodded gratefully. As Gloria disappeared down the hallway, Jack tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, look," he whispered, pointing toward the entrance to the records department. Douglas Prescott stood in the doorway, scanning the room until his gaze landed on Sarah and the children. His expression darkened as he approached. "Ms. Keller," he said, his voice low and controlled despite the evident anger behind it. "I thought we had an understanding. You were to call me with your decision, not go digging into matters best left buried." "How did you know we were here?" Sarah demanded. "Madison County is my home," Prescott replied smoothly. "I have friends in many places who keep me informed of interesting developments. Like a single mother, suddenly researching century-old court cases involving my grandfather." Sarah positioned herself between Prescott and her children. "Your grandfather lost that case, didn't he? That's why you're so determined to keep me from finding the records." A flash of surprise crossed Prescott's face before he composed himself. "You're jumping to conclusions based on incomplete information." "Am I?" Carter Blackwood's journal mentioned a ruling by Judge Wilson that made the money legally his. If that's true, then your threats are baseless. That money became part of the Blackwood estate, which eventually transferred to the Keller family when they purchased the farm. Prescott's jaw tightened. A convenient interpretation, but the law is rarely so simple. Wilson was a corrupt judge, and that ruling— "So there was a ruling," Sarah interrupted, her confidence growing. Before Prescott could respond, Gloria returned. From the archives, a large leather-bound volume in her arms. She stopped short when she saw Prescott. "Mr. Prescott," she acknowledged, with a slight nod. "I didn't realize you were interested in these records as well." "Just having a conversation with Ms. Keller," he replied smoothly. "Don't let me interrupt your work." Gloria placed the volume on a nearby table and opened it carefully. "I found the case you mentioned," she told Sarah. "Blackwood versus Missouri Pacific Railroad Company, heard in spring of 1897. Quite an interesting case, actually. I remember my grandfather mentioning it." "What did the court decide?" Sarah asked, moving to the table while keeping herself between Prescott and the records. Gloria flipped through several pages of handwritten court proceedings. According to this, Carter Blackwood sued the railroad for defamation and harassment after their investigator, William Prescott, publicly accused him of being involved in the Prairie Express robbery. She continued reading, her voice taking on the cadence of someone summarizing legal language. The judge ruled in Blackwood's favor, finding no evidence connecting him to the crime. Furthermore, this is the interesting part, the judge specifically ruled that certain funds Blackwood claimed came from a family inheritance were legally his property and not connected to the robbery. Sarah shot a triumphant glance at Prescott, whose face had gone rigid. So if Carter Blackwood was legally established as the rightful owner of that money, then it became part of his estate, Gloria finished, looking up from the documents, which would have passed to his heirs or to whoever purchased his property, depending on the terms of sale and inheritance. This is absurd, Prescott interjected. That ruling was a miscarriage of justice. Wilson was in Blackwood's pocket. Everyone knew it. Perhaps, Gloria acknowledged, but legally it stands. No appeal was ever filed according to these records. Prescott's composed demeanor cracked. My grandfather spent his life trying to recover what was stolen. That money represents his failure, our family's failure. It belongs with the Prescotts, not as some windfall for a failing farmer who stumbled across it by accident. The naked emotion in his voice revealed what Sarah had begun to suspect. This wasn't about legal ownership or corporate assets. This was personal for Douglas Prescott, a matter of family pride and vindication. Mr. Prescott, she said, keeping her voice level, I understand this is important to your family history, but that vault is on my property, and according to these court records, its contents legally belong to Carter Blackwood, whose property I now own. Prescott's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. This isn't over, Ms. Keller, not by a long shot. He turned on his heel and strode from the records department, his expensive boots echoing on the tile floor. Gloria watched him leave, then turned to Sarah with raised eyebrows. Care to tell me what that was really about? Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. It's complicated family history, she finally said. The Prescotts and the Blackwoods had disagreements that apparently still matter to Douglas. Gloria clearly didn't believe this simplified explanation, but was polite enough not to press. Well, would you like me to make copies of these records for you? Might come in handy. If those disagreements continue, that would be wonderful, Sarah said, relief washing through her. Thank you so much for your help. While Gloria photocopied the relevant pages, Sarah pondered her next move. The court ruling established that the money had legally belonged to Carter Blackwood, which meant it had passed to his heirs or to the purchasers of his property. But there were still crucial questions unanswered. How much money was actually in the vault? Was it still legally currency or merely of historical value now? And most pressingly, could she access it without triggering legal complications? Mom, Jack whispered, tugging at her sleeve. What does this mean? Do we get to keep the money? I'm not sure yet, Sarah admitted quietly, but it means Prescott can't just take it from us, which is a start. Armed with copies of the court records, Sarah took the children to the Madison County Library to research old currency and its current value. Emma settled in the children's section with a picture book, while Jack helped Sarah navigate the library's microfiche archives of old newspapers. The Prairie Express robbery had been front-page news throughout Missouri in 1892. The estimated value of the stolen shipment was reported as $50,000, an enormous sum for the time, equivalent to well over $1 million today. But more interesting to Sarah was a detail mentioned in several articles. The shipment had contained newly minted gold certificates and silver certificates in various denominations being transported to banks throughout the region. Gold certificates? Jack asked as they read. A type of currency the U.S. used to issue, Sarah explained. They were backed by actual gold held by the Treasury. They haven't been legal currency since the 1930s, but from what I'm reading here, they're extremely valuable. To collectors now, much more than their face value. Sarah switched to a more modern resource, using the library's computer to research historical currency values. What she discovered made her breath catch. Gold certificates from the 1890s, depending on condition and rarity, could be worth anywhere, from 10 to 100 times their face value to collectors. If those satchels are full of gold certificates in good condition, she whispered to Jack, we could be looking at genuine millions. Jack's eyes widened. So we are rich? Potentially, Sarah cautioned, but we need to be careful about how we proceed. Currency that old and valuable would attract a lot of attention if we tried to sell it all at once. By noon, Sarah had formulated the beginnings of a plan. The court records proved the money had been legally established as Carter Blackwood's property, not stolen goods. As the current owner of the former Blackwood farm, she had a strong claim to the contents of the vault. But converting century-old currency to modern money would require expert assistance. They stopped at the Sunrise Diner on Main Street for lunch, Sarah's mind still racing with possibilities and potential pitfalls. The diner was a Madison County institution, unchanged since the 1950s, with its chrome fixtures and vinyl booths. It was also, unfortunately, the unofficial information exchange of the county, where gossip spread faster than the daily special. The conversation in the diner dimmed noticeably when Sarah entered with the children, then resumed with a buzz that suggested they were now the main topic. Sarah guided the kids to a booth in the corner, trying to ignore the stares and whispers. Betsy Moore, the owner's daughter and head waitress, approached with menus and a sympathetic smile. "Hey there, Kellers. The usual?" "Yes, please," Sarah replied, grateful for Betsy's normal treatment. "And coffee, extra strong." As Betsy walked away, Vernon Hughes entered the diner, spotted Sarah, and made a beeline for their table. "There you are," he said, sliding into the booth beside Jack without invitation. "Been looking all over for you." Sarah tensed. "What is it, Vernon?" "What is it?" he repeated incredulously. "Half the county's talking about how you and Douglas Prescott nearly came to blows at the courthouse this morning. And something about old Blackwood money and hidden vaults. What in tarnation is going on, Sarah?" Sarah shot a warning glance at her children, who both suddenly became very interested in their water glasses. "People need to mind their own business," she said firmly, "and you shouldn't believe every bit of gossip that flies around this county." Vernon leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, I'm trying to help here. Prescott's making calls all over town, talking to the mayor, the bank president, even Sheriff Davis. Whatever's going on between you two, he's not letting it drop." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Prescott was mobilizing his considerable influence in Madison County against her. "Thanks for the warning," she said, keeping her tone even for the children's sake. "But really it's just a property dispute, nothing to worry about." Vernon looked unconvinced, but took the hint. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me, and Sarah—" He hesitated. "Prescott's not someone you want as an enemy. In this county, man's got fingers in every pie, from here to Jefferson City." After he left, Emma looked up with worried eyes. "Is the bad man going to take our treasure, Mummy?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah assured her, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. "We're going to be just fine." Their food arrived, but Sarah found she had little appetite. Vernon's warning had crystallized something she'd been trying to ignore. Madison County was Prescott's territory. He had connections, influence and resources that she couldn't hope to match in a protracted dispute. If she wanted to secure her family's future, she needed to move quickly. As they finished lunch, Sarah made a decision. Change of plans, she told the children. "We're going to make a quick stop at the bank, then head home." Madison County First National Bank occupied a granite building on the corner of Main and Elm, its architecture deliberate in its suggestion of stability and permanence. Inside, Sarah approached the reception desk, asking to speak with the bank manager. After a brief wait, they were shown to the office of Howard Mullins, the same bank manager who had been sending increasingly insistent letters about Sarah's mortgage payments. A balding man in his 60s with reading glasses perched permanently on the end of his nose, Mullins regarded Sarah with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Ms. Keller," he greeted her. "This is unexpected. I don't believe we had an appointment." "We don't," Sarah acknowledged, ushering the children into chairs beside his desk. "But I wanted to discuss some important financial matters that couldn't wait." Mullins folded his hands on the desk. "If this is about the foreclosure proceedings, I'm afraid the time for negotiation has—" "It's not," Sarah interrupted. "At least, not directly. I've recently discovered something of significant value on my property, and I need advice about converting it to more conventional assets." Mullins' expression shifted to cautious interest. "What sort of assets are we discussing?" Sarah glanced at the children, then back to Mullins. "Historical currency, specifically gold and silver certificates dating from the 1890s. The bank manager's eyebrows shot up. "I see. And how did you come into possession of these items?" "They were in a vault beneath my barn," Sarah said, deciding directness was the best approach. "Court records confirm they legally belonged to Carter Blackwood, the original owner of what is now my farm. As the current property owner, they belong to me." Mullins removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully with his handkerchief. "Ms. Keller, while I appreciate your coming to me with this, I must advise you that matters involving historical currency can be legally complex. There are questions of provenance, authentication, and proper channels for conversion." "I understand," Sarah replied. "That's exactly why I'm here. I want to ensure everything is handled properly, legally, and with the appropriate documentation." Mullins replaced his glasses, studying Sarah with new interest. "Very prudent. Many in your position might attempt less conventional methods of conversion." "I have 2 children to consider," Sarah said simply, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "I need to do this right, wise," Mullins nodded. "However, I must inform you that our small branch isn't equipped to handle transactions of the nature you're describing. Authentication of historical currency requires specialized expertise." Sarah's heart sank. "So you can't help me?" "I didn't say that," Mullins corrected. "I said our branch can't handle it directly, but I can certainly connect you with the appropriate resources." He paused, then asked carefully, "May I inquire as to the approximate value we're discussing?" Sarah hesitated, aware that the children were listening intently. "The face value is significant. The collector value is potentially much higher." "I see," Mullins said, understanding her reticence. "Well, the first step would be authentication. I can arrange for a currency expert from our main office in St. Louis to examine the items. Once authenticated, we could discuss options for conversion or auction through reputable channels." "How soon could this expert visit?" Sarah asked, thinking of Prescott's mounting pressure. "I could make a call this afternoon," Mullins replied. "Given the potential significance, I imagine they would prioritize it. Perhaps as soon as tomorrow, or the day after." "That would be perfect," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. Mullins opened a drawer and withdrew a business card, writing a name on the back before handing it to Sarah. "This is Thomas Layton, our expert on historical currency and valuables. I'll call him today, but you should keep his contact information just in case." As Sarah took the card, Mullins added with deliberate casualness, "I couldn't help noticing Douglas Prescott's car outside your property last night. I trust there are no complications regarding these assets." Sarah tensed. "Mr. Prescott has expressed a personal interest in the history of my farm. I've made it clear that the property and everything on it belongs to me." "I see," Mullins said, his neutral tone belied by the sharp assessment in his eyes. "Well, Ms. Keller, I would advise you to secure these assets carefully until our expert can evaluate them. Historical items of value can be vulnerable to various risks." The warning was clear, if diplomatically phrased. "The items are secure," Sarah assured him, "and I have documentation supporting my legal claim to them." "Excellent," Mullins rose, signaling the end of their meeting. "I'll make that call immediately and have Mr. Layton contact you directly to arrange his visit." As they left the bank, Sarah felt both relief and apprehension. She had set the wheels in motion for legitimately converting the vault's contents into usable assets, but the process would take time. Time that Prescott might use to undermine her claim or pressure her through other channels. Her suspicion was confirmed as they approached her truck in the bank parking lot. Sheriff Davis was leaning against the driver's side door, his posture casual but his presence undeniably deliberate. In his mid-40s, with a weathered face and the solid build of a former high school football player, Davis had been sheriff of Madison County for nearly 15 years. "Afternoon, Sarah," he said, straightening as they approached. "Got a minute to chat?" Sarah ushered the children toward the truck. "Jack, help Emma into her seat, please." Once they were out of earshot, she turned to the sheriff. "What can I do for you, Sheriff Davis?" "Just heard some concerning reports," he said, his tone conversational, but his eyes watchful. "Something about a confrontation with Douglas Prescott at the courthouse this morning." "Hardly a confrontation," Sarah replied. "We had a difference of opinion about some historical records." Davis nodded slowly. "Douglas seems to think there might be more to it than that. Mentioned something about valuables discovered on your property that might have questionable provenance." "Did he now?" Sarah said, her voice cooling. "And did he mention the court ruling from 1897 that legally established those valuables as the rightful property of Carter Blackwood, whose farm I now own?" The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. "Can't say that he did." "I'm not surprised," Sarah said. "Sheriff, I've discovered some historical items on my property that legally belong to me as the property owner. I've just come from the bank, where I've arranged for proper authentication and valuation. Everything is being handled through appropriate channels." Davis studied her face, then seemed to come to a decision. "Fair enough. Just doing my due diligence, you understand." Douglas was pretty worked up. "Douglas Prescott is pursuing a personal vendetta based on his family's historical connection to my property," Sarah stated firmly. "I have documentation supporting my claim, which I'm happy to show you if necessary." "That won't be needed for now," Davis said, stepping away from the truck. "But Sarah," he hesitated, "be careful. Prescott has a lot of influence in this county, and he's not used to being crossed." "So I've been told," Sarah replied, "but this is about my children's future, Sheriff. I can't just walk away because a powerful man tells me to." Davis nodded, a hint of respect in his expression. "Understood. Just keep things by the book and let me know if there's any trouble." As the sheriff walked away, Sarah leaned against her truck, suddenly exhausted. The morning's events had been a roller coaster of revelations and confrontations, and it was barely past 1 p.m. But she'd made progress, confirmation of her legal claim, arrangements for authentication, and a warning that at least the sheriff wasn't entirely in Prescott's pocket. During the drive home, Sarah kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Prescott's luxury SUV following them. Instead, she noticed a different vehicle, a weathered blue pickup truck that maintained a consistent distance behind them all the way to the county road that led to their farm. "Jack," she said casually, "there's a blue pickup behind us. Can you see who's driving without making it obvious you're looking?" Jack turned as if stretching, then glanced back through the rear window. It's a man with a beard. I can't really see his face clearly. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. It could be nothing. Another farmer heading home on the same route, or it could be someone watching her movements on Prescott's behalf. Either way, she didn't want to lead them directly to the vault. When they reached the turnoff to their farm, Sarah made a split-second decision and continued past it. "Mom, you missed our road," Emma pointed out from the back seat. "I know, sweetie. We're going to take a little detour first." Sarah drove another mile before turning onto a side road that looped back toward town, watching to see if the pickup followed. It did, maintaining the same careful distance. Now certain they were being followed, Sarah accelerated slightly, putting more space between them, before taking a sharp turn onto a narrow dirt road that cut between two cornfields. The blue pickup slowed at the turn but then followed, its driver apparently abandoning any pretense of coincidental travel. "Mom?" Jack asked, tension in his voice. "What's happening?" "Someone's following us," Sarah admitted, seeing no point in hiding the obvious. "But we're going to lose them." The dirt road was familiar to Sarah. It connected several farms and eventually looped back to the main county road, but there was a turnoff that most locals knew to avoid. A section where spring flooding had washed away part of the embankment years ago, creating a steep drop-off that was invisible until you were almost upon it. Just before that dangerous turn, there was a narrow track that led through the Turner property back to the main road. The Turners had been friends with Tom's parents for decades, and though Sarah hadn't spoken with them since the divorce, she hoped they wouldn't mind her cutting through in an emergency. She slowed as they approached. The concealed turnoff then made a sharp right onto the barely visible track between two rows of mature corn. The truck behind them missed the turn, continuing straight toward the washout. Sarah heard brakes squeal as the driver belatedly realized the danger ahead. "Hold on," she told the children as she navigated the bumpy track as quickly as she dared. Through the cornfields, the path emerged onto the Turners' gravel driveway, which led straight back to the county road, less than a quarter-mile from their own farm. Sarah didn't slow down until they were safely inside their own barn, the doors closed behind them. Only then did she exhale the breath she'd been holding since spotting their tail. "That was awesome," Jack exclaimed, a mixture of fear and excitement in his voice. "Like in a spy movie." "It's not a game, Jack," Sarah said sharply, then softened, her tone at his crestfallen expression. "I'm sorry, you're right, we did lose them, and that's good, but we need to be very careful now. Prescott has people watching us." Inside the relative safety of the barn, Sarah gathered her children close. "Listen to me carefully," she said, kneeling to be at eye level with Emma. "Things are getting complicated, and I need both of you to be extra vigilant. If you see any strangers around the farm or cars you don't recognize, tell me immediately." "Was that man trying to hurt us?" Emma asked, her lower lip trembling slightly. "No, sweetie," Sarah reassured her, though she wasn't entirely certain herself. "He was probably just watching us for Mr. Prescott, but we need to be careful until this situation is resolved." Jack, trying to be brave for his sister, squared his shoulders. "Should we check on the vault? Make sure no one's found it?" Sarah considered this. Their pursuers had been left behind, but there was no telling if Prescott had other people watching the property. "Let's wait a bit," she decided. "We'll go inside the house first. Act normal in case anyone's watching. Then after dinner, when it's getting dark, we'll check the vault." The afternoon passed with excruciating slowness. Sarah kept the children occupied with chores and homework, all while maintaining a constant vigil out the windows. She spotted no suspicious vehicles or strangers lurking at the property edges, but the sensation of being watched never quite dissipated. Shortly after 5 p.m., the phone rang, startling all three of them. Sarah answered cautiously. "Ms. Keller, Thomas Layton from First National Bank in St. Louis." The voice was crisp and professional. "Howard Mullins asked me to call regarding some historical currency you've discovered." Relief flooded through. "Sarah." "Yes, Mr. Layton, thank you for calling so promptly." "Mr. Mullins indicated the matter was urgent," Layton replied. "I can drive out to Madison County tomorrow morning if that's convenient. These evaluations are best done in person, especially with items of potentially significant value." "Tomorrow morning would be perfect," Sarah said, already feeling more secure with a plan in motion. "What time should I expect you?" "I'll aim to arrive by 9 a.m. Please don't move or clean the items before I see them. The condition and original storage. Environment can be important factors in both authentication and valuation." Sarah assured him she would leave everything untouched, then provided directions to the farm. As she hung up, a weight lifted from her shoulders. Within 24 hours, she would have expert verification of what she'd found and a clearer path forward. Her relief was short-lived. The crunch of tires on gravel announced a vehicle approaching the farmhouse. Sarah tensed, peering through the kitchen window to see Sheriff Davis's patrol car parking beside her truck. "Stay inside," she instructed the children, then stepped onto the porch to meet him. The sheriff nodded a greeting as he approached, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, hope I'm not interrupting dinner." "We were just about to start," she replied. "Is there something I can help you with, Sheriff?" Davis removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture Sarah had seen often enough to recognize as discomfort. "Got a complaint about a reckless driving incident on Turner's Back 40. Blue. Ford pickup claims you ran them off the road near the washout." Sarah's face remained neutral, even as her mind raced. So her pursuer had contacted the sheriff, twisting the story to make her the aggressor. "That's interesting, Sheriff. Especially since that pickup was following us all the way from town. My children and I felt threatened and took a detour through Turner's farm, with permission, I might add. We've had that access arrangement for years." Davis nodded slowly. "That's more or less what I figured. The driver works for Simmons Security. They do private investigations, surveillance, that sort of thing. And let me guess," Sarah said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Douglas Prescott hired them to follow me." "I couldn't say," Davis replied diplomatically. "But it's worth noting that taking evasive driving action with children in the vehicle could be considered endangerment," Sarah finished, anger flaring. "That's rich, Sheriff. A strange man follows a single mother and her children on isolated country roads, and I'm the one being questioned about endangerment." Davis had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm not here officially, Sarah. No charges being filed. Just wanted to give you a heads up that things are escalating. Prescott's pulling strings, and I won't always be able to run interference." The admission that he was indeed trying to help within the constraints of his position took some of the wind out of Sarah's sails. "I appreciate the warning," she said more calmly. "For what it's worth, I've arranged for an expert from the bank to evaluate what I've found. Everything is being handled legally." "Good to hear," Davis said, replacing his hat. "Keep it that way and document everything. Prescott's got influence, but he's not above the law, no matter what he might think." As the sheriff's car disappeared down the driveway, Sarah returned inside, her mind working furiously. Davis's visit had a clear subtext. Prescott was mobilizing resources against her, but she still had allies, or at least neutral parties, within the county. She needed to move quickly, but carefully. Dinner was a quiet affair, the children subdued by the day's events. As twilight deepened into evening, Sarah checked all the doors and windows, then gathered flashlights and a digital camera she used for documenting farm equipment for insurance purposes. "All right," she told the children when darkness had fully settled. "We're going to check the vault now. Stay close to me and remember, this is still our secret." They slipped from the house to the barn, Sarah constantly scanning for watchers. The night was mercifully clear, a half moon, providing just enough light to navigate without flashlights until they were safely inside the barn. Once the doors were secured behind them, Sarah led the way to the loft, moving hay bales to reveal The concrete plug. With Jack's help, she lifted it away, then descended the ladder into the vault. "It's all still here," Jack whispered in relief as he joined her below. "Let's make sure," Sarah replied, beginning a methodical inventory of the vault's contents. The safe remained locked, but the leather satchels and wooden crates appeared undisturbed. Sarah opened each satchel, confirming they contained the old currency she'd glimpsed earlier. Using the digital camera, she documented everything, taking clear photos of the satchel's contents, the crates and their papers, and the safe itself. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, watching her mother photograph the vault. "Creating evidence," Sarah explained. "If anything happens to these items, we'll have proof of what was here." She paid particular attention to the currency, photographing examples of each denomination and type. Most were indeed gold certificates from the 1890s, their elaborate engravings and golden seals still vibrant despite their age. There were also silver certificates and some national banknotes, all obsolete currency that would hold significant collector value. As she worked, Sarah mentally calculated what she was seeing. Each satchel appeared to contain roughly $10,000 in face value, and there were 6 satchels. The safe, if similarly filled, could contain much more. Even at the most conservative collector values, perhaps 10 times face value, they were looking at over $500,000. If the currency was particularly rare or in excellent condition, that value could multiply several times over. "We really are rich," Jack murmured, watching his mother document bundle after bundle of old notes. "Potentially," Sarah cautioned. "But we need to be smart about this. Mr. Layton will help us understand exactly what we have and how to properly convert it." After completing her documentation, Sarah made a difficult decision. "We need to take one satchel to the house tonight," she told the children. "Just as a precaution, the rest stays here until Mr. Layton's evaluation." She selected the smallest satchel, containing perhaps $5,000 in face value currency. If something happened to the vault before Layton arrived, this would be their insurance, proof of what they'd found and a significant value in its own right. They carefully replaced the concrete plug and rearranged the hay bales to conceal. It then returned to the house. Sarah hid the satchel in a secret compartment built into the old farmhouse's kitchen cabinets, a space Tom's grandmother had used to hide valuables during leaner times. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Sarah. That night, she lay awake thinking of Prescott's determination, the security firm following her, and the complex path ahead for converting century-old currency into a secure future for her children. By dawn, she had formulated a plan that extended beyond Layton's evaluation, one that would require careful timing and the discreet assistance of people she trusted. At precisely 9 a.m., a sleek black sedan pulled into the farm's driveway. Thomas Layton proved to be a tall, thin man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the meticulous presentation of someone accustomed to handling valuable items. He carried a leather attaché case and wore white cotton gloves tucked into his breast pocket. "Ms. Keller," he greeted Sarah with a firm handshake. "A pleasure to meet you. Howard speaks highly of your practical approach to this discovery." "Thank you for coming so quickly," Sarah replied, leading him toward the barn. "I've left everything exactly as I found it, except for some documentation photos I took for security purposes." "Very prudent," Layton approved. "In my experience, discoveries of this nature can attract unwanted attention." "They already have," Sarah said grimly, briefly explaining Prescott's interest and actions. "I'm concerned about the security of these items until we can properly authenticate and transfer them." Layton's expression grew serious. "I understand completely. Rest assured, once I've evaluated the items, we can arrange secure transport to our main branch if you wish." Inside the barn, Sarah removed the hay bales and lifted the concrete plug, revealing the vault entrance. Layton's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Quite the elaborate hiding place," he commented. Consistent with post-robbery concealment, the Prairie Express heist was legendary in banking circles, one of the few major robberies where the money was. "Never recovered until now," Sarah said, gesturing for him to descend the ladder. Inside the vault, Leighton transformed from cordial banker to focused expert. He donned his white gloves and opened his attaché case, revealing specialized tools for examining currency. A magnifying loupe, small measuring instruments, a specialized camera, and reference materials. "Extraordinary," he murmured carefully, examining the first gold certificate Sarah showed him. Series 1882, $20 gold certificate, Friedberg classification F1178. And in remarkable condition, minimal handling wear, no significant folds, original crispness preserved by the dry environment. Of the vault, he worked methodically through samples from each satchel, his excitement growing visibly with each new examination. "Ms. Keller, do you understand what you've discovered here? This is essentially a time capsule of newly issued 1890s currency. Most surviving examples from this era show significant circulation wear. But these," he gestured to the neatly stacked bundles, "many of these are in near pristine condition." "What does that mean in terms of value?" Sarah asked, trying to temper her hope. Leighton considered carefully. "The face value of what I've seen so far is approximately $60,000. For currency in this condition, from these specific series collector, value would conservatively be 20 to 30 times face value for common notes. For the rarer variants, and I've identified several already, we could be looking at 50 to 100 times face value." Sarah did the mental calculation and nearly gasped. "So just the satchels could be worth between $1.5 and $3 million at auction," Leighton confirmed, "and we haven't even opened the safe yet." Jack, who had been quietly observing from the corner, couldn't contain himself. "We're millionaires." Leighton smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. "Potentially, yes, though converting currency of this nature requires careful handling through proper channels. The numismatic market has specific protocols, especially for large collections suddenly appearing." "What about the safe?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the imposing Diebold that dominated one wall of the vault. "Can you open it?" Leighton examined the safe with professional interest. "This is a high-security model from the 1890s. Opening it without the combination would require a specialist. However," he ran his fingers around the dial, "these older models sometimes had manufacturers' default combinations that owners never changed." He tried several number sequences, explaining as he worked. "Diebold often used the year of manufacture as a default. If this safe dates from the early 1890s... He tried one more combination, and to everyone's surprise, the mechanism clicked. "No way," Jack breathed, as Leighton turned the handle and pulled the heavy door open. Inside, neatly arranged on shelves, were more bundles of currency, but also several small wooden boxes and leather pouches. Leighton carefully examined each item, his professional demeanor occasionally slipping to reveal genuine awe. "Gold double eagles," he announced, opening one pouch to reveal gleaming gold coins. $20 gold pieces from the 1890s, and these, he indicated several bundles of particularly ornate currency, are extremely rare high-denomination notes. $500 and $1,000 gold certificates. Even at their time of issue, these were uncommon. "And now," Sarah asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing, "now they're among the most sought-after items in American currency collecting," Leighton replied. "A single $1,000 gold certificate in this condition could command several $100,000 at auction." The magnitude of the discovery was almost incomprehensible. The total value of the vault's contents, according to Leighton's preliminary assessment, likely exceeded $5 million, possibly much more when properly auctioned through specialized dealers. "Ms. Keller, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of securing these items, Leighton said, as he carefully returned everything to its place. I would strongly recommend immediate transfer to our secure facilities in St. Louis. How would that work? Sarah asked. We have an armored courier service that can be here as early as tomorrow morning, Leighton explained. The items would be inventoried, insured, and transported under armed guard to our main vault. From there, we can arrange authentication by the top experts in the field and develop a strategy for gradual, discreet conversion to modern assets. It was the sensible course of action, Sarah knew. The vault beneath her barn was hardly secure by modern standards, and Prescott's interest made the situation increasingly dangerous. Yet something held her back from immediate agreement. I need to think about it, she told Leighton. This has all happened very quickly, and I want to make sure I'm making the right decisions for my family. Leighton nodded understandingly. In course. But please don't delay too long. News of this discovery will inevitably spread, and security concerns will multiply. He handed her his card with a direct number. Call me any time, day or night, when you're ready to proceed. As they closed up the vault and returned to the surface, Sarah noticed a vehicle passing slowly on the road that bordered her property. Though it was too distant to identify clearly, the deliberate pace suggested someone watching, evaluating. Leighton noticed her distraction. Is everything all right, Ms. Keller? Just concerned about security, she replied. I'm increasingly convinced we're being watched. All the more reason to move quickly, Leighton advised. I can have the armored transport here by 8 a.m. tomorrow if you give the word. Sarah walked him to his car, thanking him for his expertise and discretion. As Leighton drove away, she stood in the yard, contemplating her next move. The sensible course was clear. Allow the bank to secure the currency and handle its authentication and conversion through proper channels. Yet something nagged at her, an instinct that surrendering physical possession of the vault's contents might somehow weaken her position. Once the currency left her farm, she would be at the mercy of banking procedures, authentication timelines, and possibly legal challenges from Prescott or others. Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Vernon's pickup truck. The elderly farmer looked unusually agitated as he approached Sarah. You've got trouble, he said without preamble. Prescott's calling an emergency town council meeting tonight. Word is, he's going to propose some kind of historical preservation order for your property, claiming it has significant historical value that needs protection by county authorities. Sarah's blood ran cold. He can't do that. This is private property. Ordinarily, you'd be right, Vernon agreed. But Prescott's got 3 of the 5 council members in his pocket. Mayor Thompson owes him for campaign financing, councilwoman. Reed's son works for Prescott's development company, and Councilman Davis is Sheriff Davis's brother, Sarah finished, understanding dawning. So Prescott gets this historical preservation order, and then what? The county takes control of my farm, Vernon shook his head. Not exactly. From what I heard, they'd declare the historical areas, meaning your barn and that vault, protected historical landmarks. You'd maintain ownership of the property, but any historical artifacts would be placed under county protection. Conveniently, supervised by a committee Prescott would chair. That's outright theft, Sarah said, anger rising. He can't just invent a historical designation to steal what's legally mine. In normal circumstances, no. But these aren't normal circumstances. $5 million in century-old currency tends to change the rules. At Sarah's shocked expression, Vernon shrugged. Small town, Sarah. Bank employees talk. The amounts probably exaggerated, but everyone knows you found something valuable under that barn. The realization that her discovery was now common knowledge sent a wave of anxiety through Sarah. If the rumors had already spread this far, she had even less time than she'd thought. When's this council meeting? She asked. 7 tonight at The town hall. But Sarah, Vernon hesitated, if even half of what they're saying is true, you need to get that money somewhere safe before Prescott makes his move. Once that preservation order is issued, anyone removing items from the vault could be charged with theft of protected historical artifacts. Sarah's mind raced. I need to get the children somewhere safe first. If things are moving this quickly, I don't want them here. They can stay with Martha and me, Vernon offered, surprising Sarah with his immediate support. Been a while since we had young ones around the place. Martha would love the company. Gratitude washed over Sarah. Despite his occasionally annoying advice and references to Tom, Vernon had always been a good neighbor. I'd appreciate that, Vernon. Just until I sort this out. Bring them over whenever you're ready, he said, then added gravely, and, Sarah, whatever you decide to do it quick. Prescott's not a man who takes defeat gracefully. After Vernon left, Sarah called the children into the kitchen for a family meeting. She explained the situation in simple terms. They had found something valuable that legally belonged to them, but Mr. Prescott was trying to take it away through dishonest means. For their safety, they would stay with the Hughes family while she handled the situation. But what are you going to do? Jack asked, worry creasing his young face. Sarah hesitated, aware that the less they knew, the safer they would be. I'm going to protect what's ours, she said finally, but I need you both to be brave and to trust me. Can you do that? Both children nodded solemnly. Emma slipped her small hand into Sarah's. Will you be okay, Mommy? I'll be fine, sweetheart, Sarah assured her, hoping it wasn't a lie. This will all be over soon, and then we can make plans for our future. No more worrying about the farm or the bank. While the children packed overnight bags, Sarah made 3 phone calls. The first was to Thomas Layton, confirming that she wanted the armored transport, but requesting it for 7 a.m. rather than 8, and asking that the information be kept strictly between them. The second call was to Howard Mullins at the local bank, asking for a discreet meeting in his office in 1 hour. The third was to Betsy Moore at the Sunrise Diner, with a very specific request that left the waitress confused but agreeing to help. By 2 p.m., Sarah had delivered the children to Vernon's farm with promises to call that evening, attended her meeting with Mullins, and returned home to implement the most critical part of her plan. She drove her truck into the barn and closed the doors, ensuring privacy from any watching eyes. Working quickly, she descended into the vault and began a careful selection process. She couldn't move everything before Prescott's preservation order potentially took effect, but she could secure the most valuable and portable items. Following Layton's assessments, she selected the rarest currency notes, the high-denomination gold certificates, and the pouches of gold coins. These she packed into the smallest satchel, which she then concealed in a hidden compartment in her truck. The remaining currency, still immensely valuable but more bulky, she repacked into the other satchels and returned them to their places in the vault. If Prescott succeeded in getting his preservation order, he would find plenty of valuable currency, perhaps enough to initially mask the absence of the most precious items. Next, she gathered Carter Blackwood's journal and the most incriminating documents from the wooden crates, those that directly connected the Blackwood brothers to the robbery. These weren't financially valuable, but they were historically significant and potentially damaging if they fell into the wrong hands. These too went into her truck's hidden compartment. Finally, Sarah took several dozen photographs with her digital camera, documenting the vault's contents before she disturbed them and after her selective removal. These images would be crucial if questions arose later about what had been found and what remained. By 4 p.m., Sarah had completed her preparations at the farm and set out for the next phase of her plan. She drove first to the Sunrise Diner, where Betsy Moore was waiting with a small cooler as requested. I still don't understand why you need this, Betsy said as she handed it over. Better if you don't know, Sarah replied, slipping her a $50 bill, but I appreciate your help. From the diner, Sarah drove to the outskirts of town where the roads forked, one leading back toward her farm, another toward Vernon's place, and a third toward the county line. There she parked behind the abandoned Johansson feed store, a dilapidated building that had been vacant for years. The cooler Betsy had provided contained dry ice, frozen carbon dioxide used for keeping ice cream cold for extended periods. Sarah carefully placed it near the cab of her truck, avoiding direct contact with the metal, then retreated to a safe distance. Within 20 minutes, the sublimating dry ice had filled the truck's cab with dense vapor that resembled smoke. Right on schedule, a car approached from the direction of town, Sheriff Davis making his usual afternoon patrol of the county roads. Sarah stepped into view, waving her arms frantically. Davis pulled over immediately, his expression changing, from surprise to concern when he spotted the smoke pouring from Sarah's truck. "Engine fire," Sarah called, feigning panic. "It just started smoking all of a sudden." The sheriff approached cautiously, then relaxed slightly when he realized the smoke was actually vapor, cold rather than hot. "This isn't an engine fire," he said, puzzled. "This looks like—" His eyes narrowed. "Is that dry ice, Sarah?" "I need 5 minutes of your time, Sheriff," Sarah said, dropping the panicked act, without radios, phones, or any possibility of being overheard. This was the only way I could think of to ensure that. Davis stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You know I could cite you for misuse of emergency services." "But you won't," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "Because you're a good man who believes in justice, not just following Prescott's orders." That struck a nerve. Davis gestured toward his patrol car. 5 minutes, then I'm writing you up for this stunt." Inside the patrol car, Sarah went straight to the point. "Prescott is using the town council to steal my property through a fraudulent historical preservation order. You know it, I know it, and I suspect you don't like being used as his personal security force." Davis's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation against a respected citizen." "It's the truth," Sarah countered. "Your brother might be willing to vote however Prescott tells him to, but are you willing to enforce an order you know is corrupt?" "What exactly are you asking me to do, Sarah?" Davis asked carefully. "Look the other way while you remove historical artifacts? That would be illegal once the order is issued." "I'm asking you to uphold the law equally for everyone," Sarah replied, "whether they're struggling single mothers or wealthy developers. The court records prove the contents of that vault legally belong to me as the property owner. Prescott is manipulating the system to circumvent that legal fact." Davis was silent for a moment, considering. "I've known Douglas Prescott my whole life. Our families go back generations in this county. And that's why he expects your loyalty," Sarah said softly. "But your oath is to the law, not to him." The sheriff met her gaze. "What happens at 7 a.m. tomorrow?" Sarah tensed. "How did he know about the armored transport?" "What do you mean?" "Prescott has informants everywhere," Davis said not unkindly, "including at the bank in St. Louis. He knows you've arranged for an armored pickup. He intends to have the preservation order signed and in my hands before sunrise." Cold dread washed over Sarah. Her careful planning was already compromised. "If he succeeds, will you enforce it?" Davis looked away, his internal conflict evident. "I've given 30 years to upholding the law in this county. I can't selectively decide which orders to follow, even if you know they're wrong, obtained through corruption." "That's not for me to judge," Davis replied, but his tone lacked conviction. Sarah changed tactics. What if the items were already gone before the order was issued? Legally removed, by the rightful owner before any preservation designation took effect. Davis gave her a hard look. "I'm not going to help you commit a crime, Sarah. I'm not asking you to," she insisted. "I'm asking how you would respond if you arrived to enforce an order and found the items in question had already been legally moved." After a long pause, Davis spoke carefully. "If items were legally removed from private property before any preservation order took effect, there would be no violation to enforce. I would simply document the situation as I found it. It wasn't explicit permission, but it was the closest thing to a green light Sarah could expect from the sheriff." She nodded, understanding the boundaries he was establishing. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Sarah!" Davis called as she was about to exit. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. Prescott doesn't play by the rules when he's crossed." "Neither do I," Sarah replied, "when my children's future is at stake." Back in her truck, the dry ice now dissipated, Sarah checked her watch. Nearly 5 p.m., 2 hours until the town council meeting. She needed to make one more stop before returning home to enact the final phase of her plan. The Madison County Historical Society might have been closed to the public, but Sarah knew Elaine Jenkins, the elderly volunteer curator, often worked late organizing archives. Sure enough, the back door was unlocked and Sarah found Elaine surrounded by stacks of yellowing photographs. "Sarah Keller!" Elaine exclaimed in surprise. "What brings you here?" "History," Sarah replied with a genuine smile. She had always liked the enthusiastic historian, specifically the history of my farm. "I recently discovered it once belonged to the Blackwood family." Elaine's eyes lit up. "Indeed it did. Carter Blackwood was one of our county's most prosperous farmers in the 1890s. His brother was infamous, of course, connected to that dreadful train robbery. But Carter was a respected member of the community." "That's actually what I wanted to ask you about," Sarah said, taking a seat beside the older woman. "I found some old documents suggesting there was a court case involving Carter Blackwood and the railroad. Something about his property rights being established by Judge Wilson." "Oh my, yes!" Elaine's excitement was palpable as she rose and moved to a filing cabinet. "One of our most fascinating local legal cases. I wrote a paper on it for the Historical Journal some years ago." She returned with a folder containing photocopies of newspaper articles and court documents. The railroad, backed by that relentless investigator William Prescott, tried everything to prove Carter Blackwood was hiding the stolen money. When they couldn't make criminal charges stick, they attempted a civil forfeiture claim on his property. "But they lost," Sarah prompted. "Spectacularly," Elaine confirmed, warming to her subject. "Judge Wilson ruled not only that the railroad had no claim to Blackwood's property or assets, but that their persistent harassment constituted defamation. Blackwood was awarded damages, and the ruling specifically established his full legal rights to all assets in his possession." Sarah's pulse quickened. This was even better than the courthouse records had indicated. So the ruling wasn't just about dismissing the railroad's claims. It positively established Blackwood's ownership? "Precisely," Elaine said, handing Sarah the folder. "It's all in here. The case set a precedent for property rights that's still occasionally cited in Missouri courts. Quite remarkable for a rural case from that era." "This is incredibly helpful," Sarah said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "May I borrow these? I'll return them tomorrow." "Of course, dear. Always happy to help people connect with their properties." "History." Elaine paused, her expression growing shrewd. "I've heard rumors about a discovery at your farm, something connected to the Blackwoods, perhaps." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Let's just say the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it." "Indeed it does," Elaine agreed with a knowing smile. "And Sarah, if what you found is what I think you found, you should know that Douglas Prescott has been researching the same case for years. His grandfather's obsession with the Blackwoods seems to have passed down through the generations. I've noticed," Sarah said dryly. As the afternoon light began to fade, Sarah made her final preparations at the farm. The town council meeting would begin in less than an hour, and based on Vernon's intelligence, Prescott's preservation order would likely be approved despite any objections. That gave her a narrow window to implement her contingency plan. Thomas Layton had confirmed the armored transport would arrive at 7 a.m., but Sarah now doubted it would reach her farm before Prescott's order was in place. She needed to move the most valuable items tonight after the council meeting, but before dawn. She opened the satchel she'd removed earlier, examining its contents one more time. The high-denomination gold certificates alone were worth millions, according to Layton's assessment. The gold coins, 105 $20 double eagles, represented another substantial value, both as precious metal and as collectible coins from the era. Carefully rewrapping everything, Sarah placed the satchel in a waterproof bag, then concealed it inside a modified compartment in her truck's toolbox, a hiding spot Tom had once used for hunting equipment he didn't want the game warden to find. The irony wasn't lost on her that her ex-husband's secretive modifications were now protecting her family's future. At 6:45 p.m., Sarah locked the house and barn, then drove toward town for the council meeting. Though it felt wrong to leave the farm unattended, with so much still in the vault, she knew her presence at the meeting was essential. She needed to hear firsthand what Prescott was proposing and make her objections official in the public record. Madison. County's town hall was already crowded when Sarah arrived. Word of the emergency meeting and its true purpose had spread throughout the community, drawing a crowd that represented nearly every family in the county. Sarah felt dozens of eyes following her as she made her way to a seat near the front, whispers trailing in her wake. At precisely 7 p.m., Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order. After perfunctory opening remarks, he wasted no time in introducing the urgent matter requiring the council's immediate attention. Douglas Prescott has brought to our attention a discovery of significant historical importance within our county, Thompson announced. Mr. Prescott, please present your proposal. Prescott rose from his seat in the front row, immaculately dressed, as always, in a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he approached the podium with practiced confidence. "Thank you, Mayor Thompson, council members, and citizens of Madison County," he began, his voice carrying the polished cadence of a practiced public speaker. "It has recently come to light that a historical treasure of immense significance lies beneath our very feet, hidden for over a century on what is now the Keller farm," Prescott continued, gesturing dramatically. "This discovery, a vault containing currency and artifacts from the infamous Prairie Express robbery of 1892, represents a piece of our county's history that belongs to all of us. I propose an emergency historical preservation order to protect these priceless artifacts from potential damage or improper handling." Sarah rose to her feet. "What Mr. Prescott isn't telling you is that he has a personal vendetta against the Blackwood family, whose property I now own. His grandfather failed to prove any connection between Carter Blackwood and that robbery. In fact," she held up the folder from the Historical Society, "Judge Wilson specifically ruled that all assets in Carter Blackwood's possession were legally his property, assets that eventually transferred to the Keller farm when my husband's great-grandfather purchased the property." Murmurs spread through the crowd as Sarah continued, "This isn't about historical preservation. It's about Douglas Prescott trying to take what legally belongs to me and my children. The historical significance transcends private ownership," Prescott countered smoothly. "We're simply proposing reasonable protection measures." The debate raged for nearly an hour, with council members clearly divided. When the final vote came, it fell exactly as Vernon had predicted, 3-2 in favor of the preservation order. Mayor Thompson signed it immediately, handing it to Sheriff Davis with instructions to secure the site beginning at dawn. As the meeting dispersed, Sarah felt strangely calm. She had known this outcome was likely and had planned accordingly. Now, everything depended on timing and execution. Back at the farm, Sarah parked her truck behind the barn, out of sight from the road. The night was clear and still, the half-moon providing just enough light to work by. She checked her watch, 9:30 p.m. Perfect. Inside the barn, Sarah switched on a single lantern and descended into the vault one last time. Working methodically, she photographed everything again, then carefully selected one more satchel of currency. Not the most valuable, but enough to ensure her family's immediate needs would be met if something went wrong with the main cache. As she secured the concrete, plugged back in place and rearranged the hay bales, Sarah heard the faint sound of tires on gravel. She extinguished the lantern and moved silently to the barn door, peering through a crack. A dark SUV was parked at the edge of her property, its lights off. As she watched, two men emerged and began making their way toward the barn. Prescott wasn't waiting until morning. Sarah slipped out the back of the barn and circled around to her truck. Starting it would alert the intruders, but she'd anticipated this possibility. Silently, she released the parking brake and allowed the truck to roll down the slight incline behind the barn, gaining distance before she would need to start the engine. Once safely away from immediate detection, Sarah started the truck and accelerated down the back farm road, the same route she'd taken to evade her pursuers earlier. In her rearview mirror, she saw flashlights moving frantically around the barnyard as the men realized someone had been there. By the time Sheriff Davis arrived at the Keller farm at dawn, the scene was chaotic. Prescott's men had broken into the barn and discovered the vault, but found it nearly empty. Just a few bundles of common currency remained. Prescott himself was there, his carefully maintained composure shattered as he shouted accusations at anyone who would listen. She knew we were coming. Someone warned her, he raged when he spotted Davis. This is theft of protected historical artifacts. The preservation order didn't take effect until dawn, Davis reminded him calmly. Until that moment, Ms. Keller was within her legal rights to move her property however she saw fit. Then arrest her when she returns. She can't have gone far. With that much currency, Davis looked around the empty vault, then at the fuming developer. Mr. Prescott, I don't see any evidence of crime here. Just an empty storage area beneath a barn. Prescott's face reddened dangerously. You know exactly what was here. The entire county's talking about it. Rumors aren't evidence, Davis replied evenly. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, you're welcome to come by my office. But without proof of what supposedly was here and proof that it was removed after the preservation order took effect, there's little I can do. Meanwhile, 200 miles away, Sarah Keller sat in a private office at the Missouri Central Bank in Kansas City. Across from her, Thomas Layton and a team of authentication experts examined the contents of two satchels she had personally delivered at dawn. Ms. Keller, Layton said finally, looking up from his examination. Initial authentication confirms these are indeed genuine gold certificates and double eagles from the 1890s. Their condition is remarkable, some of the finest examples we've ever seen. Conservative evaluation places their value at approximately $4 million. And the legal status? Sarah asked, the question that had kept her awake during her overnight drive. The bank's legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, nodded confidently. The court records you provided establish clear provenance. The 1897 ruling specifically granted Carter Blackwood full legal ownership of all assets in his possession, removing any cloud from their title. As the current owner of the property, where these items were found, and with no competing claims from Blackwood descendants, your ownership appears legally sound. Relief washed over Sarah. How soon can the items be converted to more? conventional assets. We can begin immediately with an advance against the eventual auction proceeds, Layton explained. Say, $1 million transferred to your account today. The full conversion will take several months as we work with specialized auction houses for maximum value. Sarah signed the necessary paperwork with a steady hand, then made a phone call that had been waiting since dawn. "Vernon, it's Sarah. Could you put Jack and Emma on the phone? I have some news for them." She paused, smiling as her children's excited voices came on the line. "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. We don't have to worry about the farm anymore, or about college, or anything else." 3 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of the newly renovated farmhouse, watching her children play in the yard. The barn had been rebuilt, stronger than before, but maintaining its historical character. The fields were flourishing under professional management, while Sarah focused on her children and her newly established Blackwood Keller Foundation, dedicated to supporting education and small farm preservation throughout Madison County. Douglas Prescott had eventually dropped his pursuit of the stolen artifacts when evidence emerged of his attempted break-in the night of the council meeting. The preservation order was rescinded, and Prescott's influence in county politics had waned considerably amid the scandal. The vault remained beneath the barn, empty now, but preserved as a reminder of the past. Sarah sometimes stood in its cool confines, thinking of Carter Blackwood and his brother, of train robberies and family legacies, of secrets buried and found again when most needed. The century-old currency had transformed her family's future. But Sarah knew the real treasure had been her own determination to fight for what belonged to her children. That was a legacy worth preserving, one that couldn't be locked in any vault or stolen by any scheme. If you found this story of buried treasure and a mother's determination captivating, there's plenty more where this came from. We uncover forgotten histories and remarkable true stories that will leave you amazed at what lies beneath the surface of ordinary lives. Hit that subscribe button right now to make sure you don't miss our next incredible tale, and tap the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when we post. Your support means everything to us, and we promise that our next story will be just as gripping. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be discovered.